Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey into a world that smells, well, let's just say not so fresh. Imagine walking into a medieval village, the kind with crooked wooden houses, pigs wandering the alleys, and smoke rising from 100 little chimneys. You're probably thinking of rustic charm, but let's be honest, the real question is, how did anyone survive without the convenience of a shower? You wouldn't last a day here, not unless you've got a heroic tolerance for mud, sweat, and smells that could knock over a mule. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing just how global our Sleepy History Club has become. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in a time where the very idea of daily showers would have been laughable. To a medieval peasant, water wasn't for scrubbing away dirt and oil. It was for drinking, if you were lucky enough to have a clean source, or for hauling in buckets so heavy they made your shoulders ache. Bathing every day would have seemed about as strange as wearing your fanciest festival clothes to muck out the pigs. Most people didn't even consider it necessary. In fact, if you told them you wanted to wash every single morning, they'd probably think you were ill, or perhaps a little mad. What makes this even more fascinating is that human noses back then weren't magically different. You still smelled things. You still recoiled when something reeked. But when everyone around you had the same cloud of earthy, sweaty, smoky odor, it stopped feeling unusual. It just became part of life. You get used to it. Imagine the constant tang of sweat mixed with the sweet, sour note of dairy left too long in a jug, or the sharp scent of a dung heap fermenting at the edge of the village. The medieval peasant didn't stop and think, "I smell terrible." They thought, "This is normal." Now, one of the mainstream facts here. Yes, bathing did happen, but rarely. Medieval peasants might wash their face or hands, but the idea of a full-body soak was an occasion. You might do it at midsummer, or on a saint's feast day, or when you married off your daughter and wanted to present yourself as slightly less grimy than usual. But as a rule, you avoided it. Water was cold, tubs were scarce, and fires took a long time to heat. It simply wasn't practical. Historians still argue whether peasants' avoidance of bathing was more about practicality or belief. Was it because soap was costly, fires were hard to keep stoked, and water was hard to haul? Or was it because people genuinely thought washing too much might make them sick? There's no single answer. Both threads run through the record. But here's a quirky tidbit. When you did bathe, you often didn't do it alone. In some areas, whole families or even neighbors might share the same wooden tub. First in line got the warm water. By the time you climbed in, it was more like a stew of sweat, dirt, and floating straw, and no one thought twice about it. "Don't worry," someone might say, "the water's still good. You're just hoping you don't swallow any." Picture yourself walking back from the fields, straw sticking to your sweat, mud caked to your ankles. Instead of a shower, you rub down with a bit of rough cloth. Maybe you splash your face in a bucket and call it a day. The dirt stays, but so does your energy, because frankly, there's no expectation of being squeaky clean. Your friends don't care. Your family doesn't care. The pigs certainly don't care. And in a village where no one is bathing, being grimy isn't embarrassing. It's survival. Now, you might wonder, didn't they ever worry about health? Didn't they think about germs? The concept of germs wasn't around yet. Disease was explained through bad air, unbalanced humors, or divine punishment. If you caught the plague, no amount of soap would save you. So why waste your energy on something that wouldn't change your fate? Instead, people looked for health in what they ate, in prayers, or in the rhythm of the seasons. Of course, if you're imagining some poor soul who decides to buck the trend and scrub themselves clean every single day, you can imagine the gossip. Did you hear about that fellow? Always splashing about in the river like a fish. What's he hiding? What sins is he trying to wash off? Bathing too much made you suspicious. Cleanliness wasn't virtue, it was vanity. And as you settle into this thought, lying back in your chair or your bed, imagine what it must have felt like to accept grime as the fabric of your life. Your bed straw smells faintly of mildew, your hair has its own oily sheen, your tunic is stiff with dried sweat, and you don't care. You're tired, the work is endless, and in the dim candlelight, everyone looks just as dirty as you. It's strange, isn't it? A world without daily showers feels alien to us, almost impossible. But to them, it was perfectly ordinary. Tonight, as you sink deeper into the story, you can almost smell the hearth smoke clinging to your skin, hear the creak of leather hardened with sweat, and feel yourself drifting into a rhythm where bathing is a luxury, not a routine. You step out into the heart of the village, and the first thing that strikes you isn't the charming timber beams or the crooked thatched roofs. It's the ground beneath your feet. Muddy, uneven, slick with animal droppings, and dotted with puddles that shimmer in the pale light. You can almost hear the squelch of your boots as you trudge forward, trying not to think too hard about what exactly you've just stepped in. Medieval streets weren't the paved, tidy lanes we like to picture from storybooks. They were a mash of soil, refuse, and runoff from every nearby household. Chickens clucked and scratched in the dirt, geese strutted past with honks like cranky old men, and pigs rooted wherever they pleased. Dogs barked, not as pampered pets, but as half-feral guardians of doorsteps. And of course there was the occasional cow, her hoofprints leaving little wells of muck behind her. Imagine all of that compacted together, ground into the earth by carts and bare feet. That was your road. Here's a mainstream fact. Many villages didn't even have proper drains. Instead, people simply tossed their waste outside, slop buckets, chamber pots, kitchen scraps, everything, straight into the street. Rain washed it downhill, where it pooled in the low places, giving every lane a faintly sour smell. You can picture yourself tiptoeing around it, except there's no real way to avoid it. You're ankle deep sooner or later. But what's fascinating is how people didn't see this filth as unusual. It was simply how life was structured. The idea of a clean street would have seemed impossibly modern. If anything, they might have thought you strange for caring. Everyone shared the same environment, the same muck clinging to their feet and hems. You couldn't smell different from your neighbors because you all smelled like the same mixture of smoke, sweat, and earth. Of course, some villages tried to keep order. There might be a small fine for tossing refuse too close to a neighbor's doorway, or an official decree to shovel muck out of the market square before a saint's feast. But that didn't change the daily reality. The street was the sewer, the trash heap, and the animal yard rolled into one. And here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes people believed that walking through muck had health benefits. The dirt was thought to toughen the body, almost like a rustic spa treatment. You weren't just stomping through filth, you were building resilience. Think of it as medieval cold exposure therapy, but instead of an icy plunge pool, You got ankle-deep manure. Historians still argue whether peasants' tolerance for this filth was a matter of ignorance or adaptation. Did they simply not understand the connection between waste and disease? Or did centuries of living with it build up a kind of rough immunity? Some argue that frequent contact with dirt made their bodies stronger. Others insist the high mortality rates tell a different story. You picture yourself walking past an open doorway. A woman is tossing out dishwater, lukewarm, greasy, with a little chunk of turnip bobbing in the stream. It splashes at your feet, mixing with the puddles already waiting for you. She doesn't even notice you flinch. This is just what happens every morning. People shout across the street, children play tag through the muck, and the animals nose around happily. It's all ordinary. And yet, there's something strangely comforting about this communal grime. You're all in it together. No one looks down on you for a stained hem or muddy boots, because everyone else is just as spattered. The dirt becomes a kind of equalizer, smoothing out the differences between rich and poor, hard-working and lazy. Everyone smells the same at the end of the day. At night, when you peel off your stiffened tunic, the smell of smoke and damp earth clings to your skin. You don't bother trying to scrub it away. It's part of you now, as much as the calluses on your hands. You fall asleep to the distant lowing of cattle and the faint aroma of the dung heap outside, and it doesn't disturb you. In fact, it's the lullaby of your world. Strange, isn't it? We think of hygiene as a matter of personal choice, but in a medieval village, the very landscape made the choice for you. You walked through filth. You worked in it. You slept near it. And no one thought it odd, because to survive, you had to stop noticing. You make your way down to the edge of the village, where the well stands like a kind of gathering post. Women balance heavy wooden buckets, ropes squeak as they're pulled hand over hand, and children hover nearby with smaller pots, ready to scurry back to their cottages. You lean over the lip of the well, peer into the cool darkness, and realize something. This is not the crystal-clear spring-fed water of some mountain postcard. It's cloudy. It smells faintly metallic, and sometimes, if you're unlucky, it carries things you definitely don't want in your drinking cup. Water wasn't always safe. In fact, it was often dangerous. Wells could be contaminated by latrines dug too close, or by runoff from animals. Rivers and streams, which look refreshing from a distance, doubled as laundry sites, watering holes for livestock, and sometimes even as waste dumps. Imagine scooping up water in your hands, only to see a clump of wool grease floating by, or worse, something that's not supposed to be floating at all. And yet, this was your lifeline. You had no other choice. Here's the mainstream fact. Many medieval people preferred to drink ale, small beer, or watered-down wine instead of plain water, precisely because fermentation killed some of the harmful microbes. Children drank weak ale, adults consumed it daily, and even monasteries kept barrels of the stuff on hand. It wasn't about getting drunk, it was about staying alive. But for the peasant, who couldn't always afford even small beer, water remained unavoidable. And you hesitated every time you lifted that cup, because you knew stories of neighbors suddenly stricken with fevers, their skin flushed, their bodies racked by cramps. No one used the word cholera or dysentery, but the symptoms were familiar. Drink the wrong water, and you could be gone within a week. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some people believed that tossing a piece of heated iron into a bucket of water purified it. Others swore by dipping bread into the cup first, as if the bread absorbed whatever malevolent force lingered there. And in some villages, mothers told their children to cross themselves before drinking, because prayer might do what cleanliness could not. Historians still argue whether medieval people consciously avoided plain water, or whether it was simply a matter of taste and habit. Some records suggest that water drinkers were looked down upon, associated with poverty and weakness, while ale and wine carried prestige. Others insist that water remained common for peasants, dangerous or not, simply because it was free. You picture yourself filling a bucket from the stream. A horse wades in just upstream, its hooves churning the silt into a murky swirl. You glance at your reflection, distorted by ripples, and think about how many feet, how many mouths have already touched this water today. Still, you lift it, because there's no alternative. Later tonight, when you ladle it into a pot for soup, you'll let it boil and hope the heat drives away whatever unseen threats it carries. The funny thing is, people didn't make the connection between contaminated water and disease the way we do now. Illness was bad air, divine punishment, or humors gone astray. If half your village fell ill, you might blame a wandering stranger, or the position of the stars, but not the cloudy bucket you drank from. Knowledge of germs wouldn't come for centuries. Until then, you simply trusted, prayed, and carried on. And so you live with the unease. Every gulp is a gamble, every stream a double-edged gift. You quench your thirst because you must, but in the back of your mind, there's always that small, gnawing thought. What if tonight's cup was the wrong one? You wander past the village square and notice an old timber building with a faded sign, a bathhouse. Once upon a time, bathhouses dotted towns and even some larger villages across Europe. You could step inside, soak in warm water, and scrub away at least a layer of grime. For a brief moment, you might even feel civilized. But by your time, this building is half abandoned, its roof sagging, its reputation worse than its smell. Communal bathhouses were once a lively part of medieval life. Picture the steam rising, people sitting shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, chatting about crops or gossiping about the local lord. It wasn't glamorous. These weren't Roman-style marble spas. But for a while, they were ordinary. The working poor could sometimes afford a quick soak, and travelers welcomed the chance to rinse off the road dust. Here's the mainstream fact. Starting in the later Middle Ages, bathhouses fell into decline, not just because of economics, but because of fear. As the Black Death swept through Europe, people grew suspicious. Rumors spread that heat and steam opened the pores, letting in disease. The same logic that once justified bathing, that steam purged impurities, suddenly became a reason to avoid it. Bathhouses turned from places of health to potential death traps. You duck your head inside the shadowy doorway. The air is damp, heavy, tinged with a faint sourness of mildew. A single tub sits in the corner, the wood darkened from years of use. You can almost hear echoes of laughter from when it was crowded, the splashes of water, the clink of mugs of ale brought inside. But now, silence reigns. Only a stray cat curls up on the damp boards. Quirky tidbit. Bathhouses also carried a reputation for immorality. Many doubled as places of vice. In some towns, they were barely distinguishable from brothels. So when church authorities thundered from the pulpit about sinful nakedness and temptation, everyone knew which places they meant. To bathe too often was not just suspicious for your health, it hinted at suspect morals. What was he doing in there? Neighbors whispered. Historians still argue how quickly this decline spread. Some cities shut their bathhouses almost entirely by the 15th century. Others clung to them, albeit nervously, for generations. But the cultural shift was undeniable. What had once been social hubs transformed into scandalous or dangerous dens, until eventually, many simply rotted away. You step back into the street, pulling your cloak tighter around you. For a medieval peasant, losing the bathhouse meant losing one of the few accessible options for washing. Now, if you wanted a soak, it meant heating an enormous pot of water over your fire, dragging a wooden tub indoors, and spending hours preparing for a ritual that would be over in minutes. Most peasants shrugged and decided it wasn't worth the effort. Imagine you're trudging home, your boots thick with muck, your hair plastered with sweat. Once, maybe, you would have dreamed of the bathhouse's warm embrace. Now you just accept the grime. You rinse your hands in a basin, maybe splash your face if you feel indulgent, and call it a night. The tub stays empty. So the bathhouse fades from memory, leaving behind little more than a damp shell of wood and whispers of both laughter and sin. By the time you climb into your straw bed, the thought of washing has drifted out of your mind entirely. Tomorrow, after all, will be just as dirty as today. You sit by the hearth in a dim cottage, watching as a woman stirs a cauldron of grayish liquid. The smell hits you first, sharp, alkaline, almost like scorched wood. She reaches in with a stick, fishing out a lump of rough, crumbly soap. To you, it looks more like a piece of rock than anything you'd want against your skin. Welcome to the world where soap itself was a luxury, not a given. Soap in the Middle Ages wasn't a neat, perfumed bar wrapped in paper. It was made from animal fat mixed with lye, a caustic substance leached from wood ash. The result was often harsh and scratchy. Rub it too enthusiastically, and you might feel your skin sting, as if you'd been sandpapered. Imagine finishing a rare bath and walking away with red patches instead of a silky glow. It cleaned, yes, but it punished too. Here's the mainstream fact. Good quality soap did exist, especially in regions like Castile in Spain, where olive oil was used instead of animal fat. Castile soap became famous for its smoother texture and milder touch. But that kind of product was costly, imported, and far beyond what a peasant in a northern village could dream of affording. For most, the rough lye bricks were all there was. You pick one up and roll it in your palm. It leaves a chalky film on your fingers. The villagers treasure it, using it sparingly for laundry more often than for skin. Clothes soaked in lye soap water come out stiff, reeking of ash, but at least somewhat cleaner. Bathing with it, though, that's for special occasions, maybe once in months, if ever. Quirky tidbit. There are records of people scenting their rough soap with herbs to make it more bearable. Lavender, rosemary, or even crushed juniper berries. It didn't make the soap gentler, but at least you smelled like a forest instead of a bonfire after you scrubbed. In other places, people rubbed themselves with sand or flour instead, convincing themselves it polished away the dirt. Historians still argue how common personal use of soap really was. Was it something peasants reached for only when preparing for a feast day or a wedding? Or did some households keep it close at hand, even if sparingly, for quick face washes? The surviving records are thin, and so much depended on region, climate, and local resources. You imagine crouching by a wooden tub as someone hands you a lye soap lump. You hesitate. The water's lukewarm, the soap rough in your hand. You rub it against your arm, and the sting is immediate. The smell fills the room, sharp, burnt, almost acrid. Your skin is red, your patience thinner. And when you're finally done, the tub is a greasy froth, and you can't decide whether you feel clean or just scraped raw. So most of the time, peasants simply didn't bother. Why would they? The grime was tolerable. The effort wasn't. Instead, they focused on keeping their outer garments somewhat clean, because linen and wool could be beaten against rocks or boiled in ash water. Your skin, though? That stayed as it was. And as you settle into the smoky warmth of the cottage, you understand why. Soap was a tool, not a daily comfort. It was hard-won, harsh, and hoarded. To the medieval peasant, cleanliness was less about shining skin and more about practical survival. You wake before the sun, though wake is the wrong word, when you were never really warm enough to sink into deep sleep in the first place. The straw pokes at your back. The thin blanket still carries that sour dampness from last week's rain, and the faint clinging smell of livestock drifts in through the gaps in the wooden planks. You stretch, yawn, and notice once again that your skin carries that faint, greasy sheen that never really goes away. You think about washing, of course you do, but then you think about the water. The well isn't exactly close, and even if you trudge there, bucket in hand, you'll find the surface coated with floating specks, sometimes a dead insect, sometimes worse. You tell yourself the cold splash would wake you up, but there's no soap, not the kind you know from the supermarket shelf anyway. Soap here is an expensive curiosity, made from animal fat and ashes, more often in the hands of the better off. For you, rinsing your face in water and rubbing with your hand will have to do. And if you smell a little earthy afterward, well, everyone else does too. Historians still argue whether peasants truly bathed only once or twice a year, or whether they simply bathed differently, sponging off, wiping down, dipping hands and feet in water without ever fully immersing the body. What is clear is that the idea of daily showers would have struck them as bizarre, not because they didn't value cleanliness, but because of what clean meant to them. Clean meant not visibly caked in mud. Clean meant your tunic was shaken free of lice for the day. Clean meant you didn't reek so badly that the neighbors complained during church service. The village priest, in fact, talks more about the cleanliness of your soul than the state of your armpits. A quick confession is considered far more purifying than a bucket of cold water. If God is satisfied with your heart, why should he care that you smell faintly of onions and goat? At least that's the logic you hear muttered often enough. You rub your eyes, tug yesterday's coarse linen over your head, and wonder what your 21st century deodorant stick would have been worth in this village. Probably more than your entire cow. A neighbor shuffles past, carrying a basket of rushes, her hair a tangled mat that hasn't seen combing in a week. She gives you a nod, and you realize that, though your nose twitches at the odor, you must smell nearly the same to her. There's a strange comfort in that mutual acceptance. This is just what people are. When everyone stinks, no one does. Your mind drifts, as it often does, to that one story you heard from a traveling monk about how the Romans once soaked daily in great steaming baths, perfumed with oils and flowers. He told it with such longing, as if his soul still remembered warm water against skin. You almost wanted to laugh. Warm water for bathing? Luxury reserved for the dead of fever. Still, the story sparks something. Some say medieval peasants never cared for bathing. Others argue they did, but were simply prevented by circumstances. Rivers that froze in winter, wells that ran dry in summer, lords who forbade commoners from polluting certain streams. Archaeologists have found combs, surprisingly common, tucked in graves and huts. So perhaps lice bothered you enough to warrant effort. Clean hair might simply mean picking through it with a friend while gossiping about the harvest. You picture yourself seated on a stool, head bowed, while a cousin inspects for unwelcome tiny travelers. It's disgusting and oddly tender at once, a strange intimacy born of necessity. The morning stretches into chores. You gather eggs, scrape dung from the floor, chase a stubborn pig from the cabbage patch. Each task leaves your hands a little dirtier, your tunic a little more stained, until by midday you are dust-caked, sweat-slick, and carrying that barnyard bouquet so thoroughly that rinsing at the well would feel almost pointless. But remember, everyone else trudging by is equally coated. Even the Lord's steward, dressed in finer wool, carries a smell under his cloak. Leather, stale wine, perhaps something sourer he would never admit. The village children don't care. They play in the mud, chase chickens, come home brown as the fields. Their mothers scold them, but only half-heartedly. What water can do against such joy? You recall the odd superstition whispered here and there, that too much bathing weakens the body, opens the pores to dangerous airs. The learned doctors of Paris once cautioned against it, claiming that water seeps sickness into flesh. Better to sweat it out, they said, than risk inviting death through damp skin. And so you convince yourself it's safer to remain grimy. It's survival by neglect. Yet the allure of water never fully disappears. When summer finally comes and the river runs wide, you and the other villagers sometimes strip down and plunge into the current, laughing and shrieking at the cold shock. For a few moments, you almost feel reborn. The mud slides off, the lice drown, your skin breathes again. But the feeling is fleeting, and by evening you smell of smoke from the hearth and the tang of sweat once more. Still, you treasure those dips like secret luxuries, even if you'll tell outsiders you hardly ever bathe. What lingers most, though, is the resilience. You survive, you endure, you carry on with a body that rarely feels fresh, but somehow does not crumble. Modern sensibilities would call you filthy. Medieval sensibilities might call you hardy. And as you sit down to your bowl of pottage, spoon in hand, you notice that the smell of onions in your breath overpowers everything else anyway. Maybe, just maybe, that is the true secret of medieval hygiene. Season everything with enough garlic and no one notices the rest. The peasant who tried to stay clean. You imagine yourself as Thomas, a young villager who wakes one morning with a dangerous idea. He wants to be clean. Not just not covered in mud, but truly, miraculously clean. He has heard the priest's sermon about Romans who bathed every day. And though most people laugh, Thomas decides he will try. So he trudges to the well before dawn, when the water is still cool and the other villagers are asleep. He lowers the bucket, pulls with aching arms, and dumps the icy water into a wooden basin. He strips off his rough tunic, shivering in the pre-dawn air, and pours the first splash over his shoulders. The cold seizes his lungs, makes him gasp, but he presses on, scrubbing with handfuls of coarse sand like he once saw his uncle do to polish tools. By the time the sun rises, Thomas feels new. His skin tingles, his hair, still tangled but rinsed, is lighter. He smiles proudly as he dresses in the least dirty tunic he owns. For a moment, he believes he is the cleanest man in the entire village. But then the day begins. He carries firewood, and soot clings to his arms. He helps mend a ditch, and mud splatters up his legs. At midday, the pigs escape again, and in chasing them through the cabbage patch, Thomas lands flat in the muck. By evening, he is indistinguishable from yesterday, except for the raw redness on his skin where he scrubbed too hard. His neighbors laugh. Bathing is for fools, they say, and for kings who can waste the wood to heat water. But Thomas doesn't mind the teasing. For one brief morning he knew the shock of cold, the thrill of freshness. And though it didn't last, he decides he'll try again next week. In the end, maybe that is the secret. Hygiene not as a permanent state, but as a fleeting gift, a reminder that beneath the grime, there is still a person longing to feel whole again. The lice-picking evening. The cottage is dark, the only light coming from the orange glow of the hearth. Supper is finished, thick pottage with a bit of leek, and now the family settles into their nightly ritual. It is not prayer, not music, but something more practical. Picking lice. You sit cross-legged while your older sister combs through your hair with patient fingers. Every so often she holds something up to the firelight, pinches it, and tosses it into the flames with a faint crackle. Your mother does the same for your younger brother, while your father, tired from the fields, simply leans back and lets your aunt search through his beard. The sound is quiet, the room filled with the soft scratching of nails against scalp and the crackle of burning pests. Historians still argue whether medieval people considered lice a sign of filth or just a fact of life. In this room, it is clear. They are not shameful. They are simply there. Children giggle when a louse tries to scurry away. Adults sigh in relief when the itching lessens. No one questions it. It is as normal as washing dishes or sweeping the floor. Occasionally, your sister hums a tune as she works, and you find yourself drifting, lulled by the gentle rhythm of her fingers. You scratch her scalp in return, and for a moment, it almost feels like tenderness rather than necessity. The lice are enemies, but their removal becomes an act of care, of family bonding in a world where little luxuries exist. By the time the fire burns low, the cottage smells faintly of smoke and herbs. Your head is lighter, calmer, and you curl up on your straw mat with less itching than before. Tomorrow the lice will return. They always do. But tonight, just for a while, you are at peace. The morning stretches lazily across your village, though you barely notice because the day begins the same as every other, with chores, smells, and the quiet resignation that water is a luxury. You trudge outside, the straw underfoot crunching, and glance at the river winding beyond the fields. You've seen it hundreds of times, yet its cold shimmer still catches your eye. For most, it's only a drinking source, a spot to fetch water for the cauldron, or a place for washing a sleeve or two. For you, though, it represents a fleeting possibility of refreshment, an unspoken, almost forbidden indulgence. Your neighbors are already moving. Old men hauling firewood, women balancing buckets of milk, children chasing after pigs that never seem to tire. The air is thick with the mingling scents of smoke, sweat, and damp earth. You inhale, and for a second, your lungs register that strange cocktail as comfort rather than offense. You've lived with it so long your body has learned to accept the perfume of toil as normal. You remember the stories whispered by the traveling merchants who pass through. Tales of cities where water runs freely through pipes, and where people scrub daily in tubs heated by fire and fragrant oils. You shake your head. That's a fantasy, not reality. Here, the closest you get to such luxury is a communal wash in the river, and even that is reserved for warm months. You tug at your tunic, smeared with yesterday's labor, and decide a few splashes of river water might make the day tolerable. Historians still argue how often peasants actually dipped into rivers for hygiene. Some argue it was a seasonal ritual tied to festivals or religious holidays. Others say it was opportunistic, a chance to escape the stench after a particularly grueling day in the fields. Either way, immersion was brief, practical, and sometimes competitive. You've watched children scramble for the shallowest spots, laughing as they splash each other, while adults hover, anxious about modesty and avoiding unwanted attention. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, it was considered a mark of bravery to endure the river plunge in the chill of early spring. Older children would dare each other to wade in before dawn, shouting defiantly, teeth chattering, and emerging as if they'd conquered something far greater than the cold. You imagine joining them, the shock of icy water sending pulses through your body, and feel a nostalgic pang for that raw, reckless thrill. Back in the village, your chores continue relentlessly. The barn must be mucked, the animals fed, and the earth turned for planting. Sweat glues your clothes to your skin, your hair sticks to your forehead, and the grime accumulates layer by layer, unrelenting. You think fleetingly about a proper bath, but the logistics make the idea laughable. Heating water over a smoky hearth, hauling it into a tub large enough to immerse yourself fully. By the time you're done, exhaustion has won. Instead, you make do with a damp rag, rubbing away at your face, perhaps dipping your hands in a basin of tepid water. Not much, but it will have to do. And yet, despite the labor and filth, there is a rhythm to this life. The smell, the smoke, the mud. It becomes a part of you. Your senses adjust. You recognize the nuances, the tang of smoke from your neighbor's hearth, the faint sweetness of drying straw, the earthy perfume of freshly turned soil. You notice these things in a way outsiders never would, because you live inside them, breathing them in day after day. You glance at a neighbor kneeling by a trough, washing a tunic with rough lye soap. The soap froths aggressively, the odor sharp and biting. You wince but secretly admire the determination. Each wash is a minor victory, a tiny defiance against the pervasive dirt that dominates life. Yet most people like yourself accept that dirt is inevitable. It is the very canvas upon which your days are painted, the backdrop to your toil and rest alike. Occasionally, you wonder if your descendants will ever imagine a world where cleanliness is effortless. Perhaps they will have running water in every home, baths heated by magic, and clothes that never cling to your skin with yesterday's sweat. You smile, almost wistfully, and shake your head. Until then, you endure, you adapt, and you carry on. Dirt, sweat, and smoke are constants, inseparable from the rhythm of your existence. At night, as you finally collapse onto the straw, exhausted from the day's relentless labor, you think about the brief moments of refreshment you did manage. A splash of water on your hands, a careful rinse of your hair, a scrub with a damp cloth. They are fleeting, ephemeral, but enough to remind you that beneath the layers of grime, your body still lives, still breathes, still survives. And perhaps that is the most important kind of hygiene of all. Not the removal of dirt, but the maintenance of resilience. As the hearth dims and the wind murmurs through the cracks in the walls, you feel your eyes grow heavy. The smell of smoke, sweat, and earth lulls you in a paradoxical comfort. You drift, cocooned in the rhythm of the village, knowing that tomorrow will bring the same struggle, the same filth, and the same quiet triumphs over dirt and discomfort. The afternoon sun hangs low, though it doesn't warm much. You trudge toward the small patch of garden behind the cottage, where cabbages and turnips grow stubbornly, indifferent to your care. Your hands are blackened with soil, and when you lift a turnip from the ground, the roots cling to your fingers like stubborn memories of yesterday's muck. This is the life of a medieval peasant. A constant negotiation with dirt, not just on the skin, but everywhere, on your clothes, in your hair, under your nails. You think about washing again, though the thought barely passes your mind before necessity interrupts it. Chickens cluck impatiently at the fence, a pig grunts because you've left a gate open, and a neighbor calls out, asking for help carrying a basket of freshly milled grain. Each task leaves another layer of grime, but also a sense of accomplishment. Dirt is not just a nuisance, it is proof of labor, proof of survival. Historians still argue whether peasants regarded dirt as inevitable or simply unavoidable. Some scholars believe that living constantly in muck built a kind of natural immunity, while others suggest that high mortality rates reflect the harsh consequences of poor hygiene. Either way, the fact remains that medieval life was inseparable from filth, and peasants learned early that a little dirt is not the end of the world. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, herbs were tucked into clothing not only to mask odors, but as talismans against disease. Sprigs of rosemary or thyme might hang from belts or be sewn into tunics, carrying the faint scent of a garden even when the hands and face were coated in earth. You inhale the faint aroma of wild herbs clinging to your sleeves and realize it's the closest thing to a perfume you're likely to encounter today. You pause by the well for a drink. The water is cool, laced with sediment, but it quenches your thirst. You splash some on your face, a brief refreshment, before returning to the garden. Sweat rolls down your back, mingling with dust and the faint residue of yesterday's chores. It is uncomfortable, yes, but you are alive, and the sun beating on your shoulders feels almost satisfying in its constancy. The neighbor children tumble into the garden, laughing, chasing each other through the dirt, their faces streaked with mud and sweat. Their joy is infectious, reminding you that filth is not inherently unpleasant. It becomes a canvas for life. You bend to help them pick weeds, your fingers coated in soil, and for a moment, the outside world with its judgments feels very far away. Your thoughts wander to the future, imagining a world with running water and warm baths. It seems unimaginable, almost like a fairy tale. Here, bathing is rare, and even a quick rinse requires effort. Some days you catch yourself daydreaming about a proper soak, a warm tub filled with scented water, free of lice and sweat. But those moments are fleeting, and practicality always wins. Work must continue, and dirt will return long before nightfall. You notice the pigs rooting nearby, scattering the soil as if reminding you of your limits. No matter how much effort you make to remain clean, nature and necessity will always reclaim you. You wipe your hands on your tunic, not caring that it only spreads the grime further. Acceptance is part of survival. As the day wanes, the cottage fills with the familiar smells of cooking, roasting vegetables, smoky hearth, and the ever-present aroma of earth clinging to clothes and skin. You sit to eat, hands blackened, tunic smudged, and reflect on the strange comfort of routine. There is a rhythm here, a balance between labor and respite, filth and fleeting cleanliness. At dusk, you step outside once more. The village quiets as animals settle and neighbors retreat indoors. You glance at the river, the smoke curling from chimneys and the darkening fields, and feel a sense of calm. Tomorrow will bring more dirt, more work, and more fleeting moments of cleanliness. But for now, the world is still, the air is cool, and the rhythm of village life lulls you towards sleep, reminding you that endurance is the truest kind of hygiene. Evening descends, and the village takes on a softer, quieter rhythm. Smoke drifts lazily from chimneys, curling into the cool twilight, and the air smells of wood fire, damp straw, and faintly of herbs pressed into tunics. You sit on the edge of the cottage, resting your back against the rough timber, and notice that the day's labor has left your skin coated with a thin layer of grime, sweat, and ash. Your hands are blackened from the earth, your tunic carries the dust of the fields, and your hair is matted from sweat and straw. And yet, strangely, you feel a kind of contentment in the mess. Medieval peasants lived with dirt not as a mark of shame, but as a natural companion. Hygiene was a fleeting, occasional luxury, and yet its absence did not diminish life itself. You stretch your stiff muscles and think of water, of the river, and the rare pleasures of a proper soak. Historians still argue about how much bathing actually occurred. Some say it was nearly ceremonial, reserved for feast days or before church events. Others insist that practical cleaning happened daily, in small ways, washing hands, wiping the face, or dipping feet into cool streams when possible. Quirky tidbit: some villagers carried small sachets of crushed herbs to mask the stronger scents of body and clothes. Lavender, rosemary, and mint might be tucked into belts, sewn into tunics, or even pressed into straw mats. It didn't clean you exactly, but it gave the faintest hint of civilization amidst the prevailing aroma of labor and livestock. You inhale, faintly amused, and realize that smell and perception of cleanliness are as much social as practical. You glance at the neighboring cottages. The smoke drifting from their chimneys signals dinner, conversations, and preparation for the night. Children chase each other until the last light fades, slipping and laughing in the mud and puddles. Their joy seems impervious to filth, their small bodies accustomed to it, embracing the mess as part of play. You remember your own childhood, chasing pigs or rolling in hay, and understand that dirt is inseparable from the rhythm of daily life. A basin of water sits by your doorstep, reserved for washing hands before meals, or for a rare splash to cool down after work. You dip your hands and face into the cool liquid, wincing at the chill, and realize that such moments, brief as they are, carry the weight of luxury. Full immersion baths are nearly unheard of, and yet this small gesture brings a fleeting sense of refreshment. It is a reminder that hygiene in this era is a negotiation, a balance between necessity, effort, and resources. Historians still debate the cultural perception of filth. Was it merely tolerated, or did people develop a kind of immunity, social, psychological, even physical, to constant dirt? Evidence suggests that it was both. Communities adapted rituals, small practices, and shared tolerances to maintain social cohesion, despite the omnipresence of grime. You notice that neighbors glance at each other, not with disgust, but recognition. Everyone is in the same condition, and that shared experience fosters an unspoken camaraderie. You think about lice, fleas, and other unwanted companions that inhabit hair and clothing. Picking them out is a nightly task, often communal and intimate. Families gather around fires, combing through each other's hair while stories are whispered, and the smallest giggle or sigh punctuates the laborious process. In this, hygiene merges with human connection, a practice both necessary and oddly tender. You imagine the warmth of this ritual, the glow of the firelight illuminating sweat-streaked faces, and you feel comforted despite the discomfort of the task. As darkness deepens, you glance at the river once more, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. It promises escape, refreshment, perhaps even indulgence, but tonight you remain at home. The chores are done, the animals fed, and the fire burns low. You settle onto your straw bedding, listening to the soft murmurs of the village as it drifts toward sleep. The air is heavy with the scent of wood, herbs, and soil, wrapping around you like a rough but familiar blanket. In this quiet, you realize that survival in medieval life is inseparable from grime. Dirt and sweat are constant companions, yet you endure, adapt, and even find comfort in them. Cleanliness, when it arrives, is celebrated but fleeting. And as you close your eyes, the rhythm of the village, the weight of labor, and the brief joys of water and warmth lull you toward rest. You are alive, you are resilient, and tomorrow the cycle will begin anew. Night deepens over the village, the horizon streaked with the last hints of twilight. The air is cool, but your body still carries the warmth and grime of the day. Sweat and soil cling stubbornly to your skin, and your tunic is stiff from hours of labor. You glance toward the river again, its faint silver glint teasing a fleeting dream of cleanliness. But tonight, the water is just out of reach. Even if you ventured there, the chill would steal your breath, and the effort to haul yourself fully into it seems unnecessary. Instead, you settle into the cottage, the hearth casting long, flickering shadows across the walls, and accept the reality of another day lived in filth. You think of your neighbors, some of whom have just completed their evening chores, sitting by their fires, hands blackened from hauling wood, mixing pottage, or scraping tools. Like you, they rarely bathe, but there is a rhythm to their lives that embraces it. Dirt is not merely tolerated. It is a companion that signals effort, endurance, and resilience. You scratch your scalp absently, aware of a few unwelcome guests, lice perhaps, settling in as if they too have earned the right to survive alongside you. Historians still argue about the psychological effects of living constantly in grime. Did people adapt to it so thoroughly that it became almost imperceptible? Or did it subtly shape their expectations and perceptions of comfort? You wonder, as you rub at your face with a damp rag, whether the occasional splash of water or herbs is appreciated more for its sensory relief than for actual cleanliness. The contrast between the temporary freshness and the constant accumulation of dirt heightens your awareness of both. And somehow, this makes the small indulgence even more rewarding. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, it was common to apply a paste of crushed herbs and ash to the skin. It served multiple purposes, masking odors, repelling insects, and sometimes even believed to prevent illness. You imagine doing this yourself, smearing the gritty mixture across your arms and legs, feeling both practical and slightly ridiculous. Yet, in a world without daily baths, it is a small comfort, a ritual that bridges necessity and creativity. The children outside have quieted now, replaced by the soft rustling of animals returning to their pens and the occasional owl hoot from the nearby woods. You watch the smoke curl from chimneys, the way it drifts lazily before fading into the night sky. The familiar scents mingle: wood smoke, cooking food, damp straw, and the lingering musk of human labor. You inhale deeply, finding an odd reassurance in this olfactory tapestry, knowing that life here is constant, unvaried, but enduring. Even the hardships carry a certain poetry. Mud, sweat, lice, and ash are not just marks of discomfort. They are symbols of survival, tangible proof of daily victories. Every scratch you endure, every layer of grime you tolerate, speaks to a life lived fully, however rough it may be. In this sense, filth is not an enemy. It is a mirror, reflecting resilience, community, and the rhythm of human existence in a harsh, unforgiving environment. You think back to the river again, remembering the rare moments of immersion, the shock of cold water, and the exhilarating relief as dirt slid away temporarily. Those moments are fleeting, and yet they linger in memory far longer than the discomfort. They are celebrated privately, in the hush of twilight, and shared quietly in anecdotes, laughter, or gentle teasing. Historians still argue whether the occasional river bath was sufficient for preventing disease or simply a psychological respite. Either way, it matters less than the ritual itself, the act of stepping into water, feeling the chill, and briefly imagining a life free of grime. That imagination, however brief, carries a weight of hope that pure practicality alone cannot provide. As the night deepens, you finally lay on the straw bedding, exhausted from the relentless cycle of labor and filth. You feel every ache, every layer of soil and sweat, every tingle of awareness from insects or friction from stiff clothing. Yet the rhythm of the day, the repetitive motions, and the steady constancy of survival lull you toward sleep. You inhale the mingling scents of earth, smoke, and faint herbs one last time, allowing the familiarity to soothe you. In this quiet cocoon, dirt and labor fade into the background. You understand that survival is not always about comfort, that cleanliness is often fleeting, and that resilience, endurance, and small moments of relief carry more meaning than soap or warm water ever could. And as your eyes grow heavy, the village outside breathes with you, sharing its filth, its toil, and its simple, enduring heartbeat. The early hours of night stretch on, but sleep does not come immediately. You lie on your straw bedding, listening to the gentle sounds of the village, the creak of timber, the low murmur of animals settling in, the occasional whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls. Your body is coated in the day's labor, skin sticky with sweat, tunic stiff with mud and soot, and yet there is a certain comfort in the familiarity, in knowing that everyone else around you is equally enmeshed in the same daily rhythm of filth and toil. You reach for a damp rag, wiping your face and hands in a brief attempt at refreshment. Water is scarce, and a full bath is unthinkable. Hauling a bucket from the well and heating it over the hearth would sap all energy. Instead, you make do with small gestures, splashing your face, rubbing your arms, patting your hair. It is not enough to cleanse thoroughly, but it is enough to remind yourself of the fleeting sensation of cleanliness. Historians still debate how medieval people perceived hygiene. Did they view their constant exposure to filth as a hazard, or did they adapt so thoroughly that dirt became a natural part of existence? You consider this while your mind drifts, imagining the village in all its textures: mud-streaked walls, straw-laden floors, smoke-blackened beams. Each layer of grime is evidence of survival, of resilience, and of a life lived in constant motion. Quirky tidbit: some peasants believed that rubbing mud onto certain areas of the body could strengthen it against illness. Mud as medicine, dirt as defense. Strange by modern standards, but in a world without daily baths, every bit of folklore and practice counted. You might laugh if you were not so accustomed to living in the same layer of earth, sweat, and smoke that your ancestors navigated. Outside, the children have long since succumbed to sleep, wrapped in whatever scraps of blankets and straw they could find. You recall how they used to play in the river during summer months, how the shock of cold water made their laughter pierce the air, and how fleeting moments of immersion in clean water were remembered long after the experience ended. The adults seldom joined, but they watched with faint envy, recalling the brief reprieves water once offered. your thoughts drift to the animals. Goats and pigs settled for the night, the smell of hay, manure, and fur mingling with the pervasive smoke. Even the livestock, you realize, carries its own layer of grime, an everyday testament to survival and adaptation. In a strange way, their scent is comforting. It is familiar, stable, unchanging, and part of the rhythm of life. You inhale the mingled aromas, letting the sensory tapestry lull you further toward rest. You reflect on communal rituals. Evenings often include minor grooming sessions, hands working through hair to remove lice, whispers exchanged over the fire, and the occasional shared joke. These rituals serve not only practicality, but connection, intimacy born of necessity. In a world where cleanliness is a privilege, care for one another becomes a form of subtle hygiene, combing out pests, offering herbs to mask odor, and lending a hand with washing when resources allow. Historians still argue whether the psychological benefits of such rituals were understood, or whether they simply emerged from practical needs. Regardless, the outcomes are clear. Families and neighbors share burdens, maintain some semblance of cleanliness, and reinforce social bonds in the process. You imagine sitting cross-legged by the fire, watching your family groom one another, and feel the paradoxical comfort of filth mingled with care. Even the occasional river dip carries significance. When the weather permits, plunging into cold water is more than hygiene. It is an ephemeral freedom, a temporary shedding of layers of sweat, mud, and worry. The sensation is electric, skin prickling, muscles shivering, a fleeting clarity that disappears as soon as you return to your daily tasks. And yet the memory of it lingers, cherished as a rare indulgence in a life dominated by labor and grime. As the night deepens, you settle more fully into your straw bed. The sounds of the village soften. The creaking wood, the murmurs of animals, the rustle of leaves outside. Your body, though coated in layers of dirt, carries the day's rhythm, the exhaustion of survival, and the subtle satisfaction of enduring. Filth is no longer just discomfort. It is testimony, continuity, and the backdrop against which life unfolds. In the quiet, you realize that survival and resilience matter more than any tub of water or basin of soap. The rhythm of labor, the shared care of family, the rare pleasures of immersion. These are the true measures of hygiene in a medieval village. And as your eyelids grow heavy, the village hums softly with you, the air carrying the combined scent of earth, smoke, and faint herbs, guiding you toward sleep. Dawn has yet to break, but your body is already awake, stiff from yesterday's toil, and coated in the familiar film of sweat, dust, and smoke. You step outside into the cool air, feeling the uneven ground under your bare or half-shod feet. Each step a small reminder of the day-to-day endurance required just to exist. The village lies quiet, animals still nestled in pens, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, and the faint scent of damp straw rising into the morning chill. You breathe it in, almost finding comfort in the familiar odors that mark the rhythm of survival. Water beckons once again, the river glinting faintly in the dim light, but practicality wins. Today your tasks require focus, not indulgence. You will scrape manure from the barn floors, tend to the fields, and haul buckets of water for cooking. The thought of a proper bath is a distant luxury, a whisper of another life entirely. Instead, you settle for small rituals, dipping your hands into a basin to rinse off the grime from your fingers, wiping your face with damp cloth, and occasionally brushing at hair with a wooden comb, removing a few unwelcome companions along the way. Historians still argue whether these piecemeal efforts at cleanliness were considered hygiene or simply a way to make life tolerable. For you, there is little distinction. Every motion of scraping, rubbing, or rinsing is a brief reclamation of comfort in a world dominated by dirt. Even the smallest relief, cool water on hands, a wipe across the face, carries profound significance. You feel momentarily refreshed, though the effect is fleeting, and the grime returns with every step, every chore, every brush against straw or earth. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believe that dirt could protect the skin from sunburn or insect bites, an accidental shield against the elements. While it seems absurd to modern sensibilities, in a world where bathing is rare, such interpretations made practical sense. You brush the earth from your forearms and imagine a faint layer of armor forming, guarding you from the harsher realities of fieldwork and weather. The children emerge from their bedding, faces still streaked with sleep and yesterday's dirt. They chase chickens through the yard, laughing and squealing, entirely unbothered by the mud that splashes up onto tunics and bare legs. You watch them, a faint smile tugging at your lips, realizing that joy persists even amidst the omnipresent filth. Their laughter carries, mingling with the low murmurs of adults tending chores, forming an auditory tapestry that softens the harshness of labor and grime. You pause to inspect the garden. Crops push stubbornly from the soil, leaves dusted with earth and dew. Tending to them requires bending, stooping, and inevitably coating your hands and arms with more dirt. Sweat begins to collect at your back, mixing with the early morning mist and the residue of yesterday's labor. Yet there is satisfaction here. The physical engagement with the earth, the rhythm of planting, watering, and tending, offers a grounding that few comforts can rival. Dirt, in this sense, is less a nuisance than a testament to life, effort, and continuity. Historians still debate how much peasants valued cleanliness in the modern sense. Some argue that the absence of frequent bathing reflects cultural norms. Others point to limited access to resources, cold climates, and labor-intensive lives as decisive factors. Regardless, what emerges is a picture of resilience. People adapting, finding small rituals of refreshment, and negotiating comfort within the constraints imposed by circumstance. You, too, navigate this balance, aware of filth, yet undeterred, appreciating fleeting sensations of cleanliness when they arise. By midday, you are coated in a new layer of dust and sweat, the previous night's grime now indistinguishable from today's. You pause at the river, considering a brief splash, but your mind reminds you that chores await. Even the briefest indulgence in clean water requires preparation, fetching, heating, and hauling, all tasks that sap energy better spent elsewhere. You settle instead for a quick rinse of your hands and face, feeling the fleeting chill and savoring the ephemeral relief. As the sun arcs higher, the village hums with activity. Smoke, earth, herbs, and sweat mingle in the air. You work, pause, and reflect on the strange intimacy of shared filth. Families groom one another in the evenings, neighbors exchange herbal sachets, and even the animals contribute to the olfactory landscape. Filth is no longer merely discomfort. It is a canvas upon which life is painted, a marker of shared survival, and a reminder of human resilience in a world that often feels indifferent. And as you finally sit for a brief meal, the warmth of pottage and the aroma of roasting vegetables mingling with the ever-present scent of earth and sweat, you understand that hygiene is not just the absence of dirt. It is the negotiation of comfort within labor, the fleeting joys of water, the shared rituals of care, and the enduring rhythm of life. And though filth surrounds you, it is in these moments, amidst the sweat, smoke, and soil, that you find a quiet satisfaction. Afternoon drifts toward evening, and the village seems to exhale as work slows. You trudge along the uneven path toward the small cluster of cottages, hands sticky with sap and soil from tending the garden, tunic caked with mud, and hair clinging to your sweat-slicked forehead. The air smells of hearth smoke, damp earth, and the faint tang of herbs pressed into clothing, scents that have become strangely comforting over time. You pause for a moment, taking in the gentle chorus of animals settling for the night, children laughing and tripping in the dirt, and the occasional distant bark of a dog. The river glimmers faintly under the late sunlight, but as usual, practicality outweighs desire. A full immersion would require effort, preparation, and warmth, luxuries that are rare and fleeting. Instead, you carry a small basin of water back to the cottage, dipping your hands to remove a layer of sweat and grime, a brief respite that lasts only minutes. Yet even these small acts of refreshment are significant, a fleeting negotiation with comfort in a world dominated by labor and dirt. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants truly valued bathing or merely adapted to circumstance. Some argue that the scarcity of baths reflects cultural norms, while others point to practical limitations. Cold rivers, limited fuel, and constant work that leaves little time for indulgence. Either way, it is clear that survival and endurance often trumped cleanliness. You feel it in your bones, in the rhythm of chores, and in the persistent layers of soil and sweat on your skin. Quirky tidbit: in certain villages, families tucked fragrant herbs into the seams of clothing or beneath straw mats to mask odors and provide faint comfort. Rosemary, lavender, and mint served both practical and psychological purposes, offering a subtle, reassuring aroma amidst the omnipresent sense of labor, sweat, and animals. You inhale faintly as you move past the mat of straw near the hearth, and the scent mingles with smoke and soil, forming a tapestry unique to your life. You notice neighbors gathered around fires, scraping utensils and tending the last chores of the day. Some are brushing hair, others combing out pests from scalps, and a few are washing hands or feet in small basins. The rituals are communal and intimate, a quiet affirmation of care and connection in an otherwise labor-heavy life. You watch for a moment, marveling at the paradox. Dirt and filth surround them, yet these small acts of maintenance create comfort, shared understanding, and fleeting relief. The children, having finally exhausted themselves, curl into straw bedding, faces still streaked with mud, but eyes heavy with sleep. You remember your own youthful games, chasing pigs through puddles, rolling in hay, and laughing despite, or perhaps because of, the constant grime. Dirt was not merely tolerated, it was part of play, a medium for experience and joy. The adults, though burdened with labor, recognize this unspoken rule, letting children be until exhaustion naturally claims them. Evening meals are a mix of practicality and comfort. Pottage steams in bowls, bread is broken, and families share stories amidst the aroma of roasting vegetables, fire, and earth. Hands are washed as best as possible, faces wiped with damp cloths, and sometimes the rare indulgence of a basin of water provides relief. It is a careful choreography of survival, hygiene, and shared labor, a delicate balance maintained daily. Historians still debate how these rhythms shaped perceptions of cleanliness and health. Some argue that filth was an accepted part of life, while others suggest that these adaptations were sophisticated strategies to coexist with environmental and social realities. You reflect on the balance between discomfort and relief, understanding that even brief rituals, washing hands, splashing water on the face, combing hair, carry significance beyond mere practicality. As dusk deepens, the village settles into a quiet hum. The smoke curls lazily from chimneys, animals rustle softly in pens, and the wind whispers through gaps in walls. You sit on the edge of the cottage, feeling the residue of the day cling to your skin, and yet you sense the comfort of endurance, ritual, and small shared pleasures. Filth, sweat, and labor have become part of the rhythm of life, proof of survival, and markers of resilience. In this quiet, as twilight fades, you finally allow yourself to breathe and rest, knowing that the cycle will continue tomorrow. Even amidst dirt, toil, and constant exposure to the elements, there is beauty, continuity, and comfort. Proof that life persists and thrives, regardless of cleanliness. Night descends fully, and the village exhales a quiet, collective sigh. You trudge along the familiar paths, muscles stiff and skin coated with sweat, dirt, and soot, the residue of a day's labor that seems to cling more stubbornly with each passing hour. Your tunic is streaked with mud, your hair is matted, and your hands carry the faint, earthy scent of soil, herbs, and smoke. Yet strangely, these sensations feel like a part of life itself, a tactile reminder of effort, survival, and the rhythm of medieval existence. You pause by the small garden behind your cottage, the plants barely visible in the dim glow of lanterns or moonlight. You reach down to inspect the roots, brushing dirt from your fingers, and feel the mingling of fatigue and satisfaction. Work has coated you with grime, but it has also reminded you of your place in the village, your role in sustaining life, and the delicate balance between effort, reward, and endurance. Historians still debate the significance of hygiene in this period. Some claim that frequent bathing was culturally discouraged. Others suggest that the scarcity of water, firewood, and time made it impractical. Whatever the reason, peasants developed a routine, small gestures of cleanliness interwoven with survival. A splash of water on hands, a wipe of the face, or the occasional combing out of lice were tiny victories in the ongoing struggle against dirt and discomfort. You feel this truth in your bones as you rub your hands along the rough wood of the fence. Quirky tidbit. In certain villages, it was common to smear ash mixed with herbs on skin to repel insects or mask odors. While it seems strange to modern eyes, it was a practical solution that also offered a faint sensory comfort. You imagine your forearms brushed with this mixture, feeling the gritty texture and subtle scent of rosemary or thyme, a small illusion of cleanliness amidst the ever-present grime. The children have long since fallen asleep, curled in straw bedding with faces streaked from the day's play and chores. The adults move quietly, finishing evening tasks, tending fires, or simply sitting to rest. You notice that even in the dim glow of firelight, the ritual of care persists. Hair is combed, minor scrapes washed, and hands wiped. Tiny acts that maintain comfort, human connection, and a fleeting sense of cleanliness. These gestures are shared, communal, and strangely intimate, highlighting the subtle interplay between labor, filth, and care. You think back to the river, glimmering faintly in the distance. The rare moments of immersion are memories that linger longer than the discomfort they produce. The sharp shock of cold water, the temporary shedding of dirt, and the brief clarity that follows. These fleeting indulgences are celebrated quietly, preserved in stories, laughter, or gentle teasing. Even though they are rare, they offer insight into the human desire for refreshment, comfort, and a momentary escape from the constant rhythm of labor and grime. Historians still argue whether these practices had meaningful health benefits or were primarily psychological. Either way, the act of ritual washing, however limited, reinforces resilience, endurance, and social cohesion. You reflect on the interplay of necessity and desire, the effort it takes to wash, the limited access to water, and the ephemeral joy that each small splash provides. As darkness thickens, you finally settle onto your straw bedding. The smell of smoke, earth, and faint herbs envelops you, a familiar and comforting cocoon. Your body, coated in layers of dirt and sweat, carries the accumulated fatigue of the day, yet there is satisfaction in this endurance. You breathe deeply, letting the sensations mingle with the quiet rhythm of the village, the low murmurs, the occasional rustle of animals, the soft whisper of wind through wooden beams. In these moments, you understand that survival in a medieval village is inseparable from filth. The constant presence of dirt, sweat, and labor shapes daily life, but so too do small rituals of refreshment, shared care, and fleeting indulgences. Even amidst discomfort, there is resilience, comfort, and continuity. And as your eyes grow heavy, you surrender to sleep, cocooned in the familiar textures and scents of a life both harsh and enduring. Your thoughts wander to the fleeting relief of immersion in water, the shock of cold, and the temporary shedding of layers of dirt and sweat. Even the memory of these moments carries weight, a private indulgence cherished quietly amidst the persistent demands of labor. You remember laughter from riverbanks, whispered stories during hair combing, and the communal sharing of herbs, all subtle yet vital acts that maintain comfort and cohesion in a world dominated by filth. Historians still debate the physical and social impacts of these practices. Did they prevent disease? Did they influence community bonds? Likely both. And as you lie on your straw bed, the accumulated scents of earth, smoke, and faint herbs surrounding you, you sense the profound truth. Survival is inseparable from resilience, and hygiene is as much about adaptation, ritual, and shared care as it is about water and soap. You settle deeper into your bedding, inhaling the familiar aromas and letting your body relax fully. Muscles ache, skin is roughened, yet there is satisfaction in endurance, pride in surviving each day, and comfort in the unchanging rhythm of the village. The night hums softly, animals breathing, wind rustling, firelight flickering in the distance. Filth is not an enemy. It is a companion, a marker of work done, life lived, and continuity preserved. Tomorrow will bring more labor, sweat, and layers of grime. But tonight, cocooned in straw, wrapped in scent and memory, you are at peace. Hygiene may be fleeting, yet resilience, ritual, and connection endure, and as your eyelids finally close, the village whispers its quiet lullaby, carrying you gently into sleep, cradled by the familiar rhythm of life, dirt, and survival. The village settles into silence, the day's labor now only a memory pressing lightly against your muscles. You lie in your straw bed, body warm yet sticky from the day's toil, the faint aroma of smoke, herbs, and earth enveloping you like a familiar blanket. Each breath carries the stories of the day, the laughter of children, the creak of timbers, the soft rustle of animals, and you let them drift over you like gentle waves, calming, steady, unhurried. The moonlight filters softly through the gaps in the walls, painting quiet patterns across the floor. You feel the weight of your body sinking into the straw, Every ache, every layer of grime, every tingle of awareness from insects or friction from clothing slowly fading into the background. Here, in the hush of night, there is nothing to do but breathe, imagine, and drift. You remember the small gestures of the day, dipping hands into a basin of cool water, brushing hair, inhaling the subtle scent of rosemary and thyme pressed into tunics, watching the river shimmer in the distance. They were fleeting, yet their comfort lingers now, gentle as a whisper against your skin. Even the dirt, sweat, and fatigue carry a strange reassurance, proof of labor done, of life lived, of endurance preserved. Let your mind float along the rhythm of the village, the soft breathing of sleeping animals, the faint crackle of the dying fire, the whisper of wind through wooden beams. Each sound is a lullaby, each scent a familiar companion. You are safe here, cocooned in the textures, smells, and gentle rhythm of life. Relax your shoulders, soften your jaw, and let the world outside fade away. Your eyelids grow heavy, thoughts slowing, breathing deepening, body unwinding. The day's work, the filth, the toil, they are all behind you now. Only stillness remains, only calm, only the soft embrace of night guiding you into sleep.